there's a weird bipartisan interest in shipbuilding right now in the United States at a time when partisanship is really problematic.
You're listening to the USSC Briefing Room, a podcast from the United States Study Center at the University of Sydney, where we give you a seat at the table for a USSC briefing on the latest developments in U.S. news and foreign policy. We'll cover what you need to know and what's beneath the surface of the news.
Hello, I'm Mari Kirk, Director of Engagement Impact at the United States Study Center. Thanks for joining us on the USSC Briefing Room today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we're recording on today. The University of Sydney is located on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and future. President Trump wants to make American shipbuilding great again. China has significant dominance in shipbuilding, with 34% of all ships on water being made in China and 57% of ships under construction being made in China. So how do systems around finance and infrastructure influence global power dynamics? And how much of a concern is increasing U.S. shipbuilding? And finally, what role does Australia play in this shipbuilding ecosystem? Well, to discuss these questions, I'm happy to be joined by Mary Bridges. She's our 2025 USSC American-Australian Association Fellow. She's currently an Ernest Bay Fellow at Harvard's Belfer Center, and she's the author of the book Dollars and Dominion, U.S. Bankers and the Making of a Superpower. Her research looks at the intersection of U.S. foreign relations and business history, and she's been conducting research on shipbuilding and infrastructure in both the United States and Australia. So, Mary, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much. It's an honor to be here. Really appreciate it.
And at the end of the episode, we'll get your by-the-numbers stats, so that I'm really looking forward to hearing that. So I guess just to kind of kick things off, can you start with a bit of framing for us? Because your research has looked at a lot of the power dynamics being linked with, overseas banking and infrastructure financing, and then how these shape geopolitics. So can you give us a brief overview of your theory of the case for why and how these systems transfer global power and influence?
Thanks so much. So right now I'm working on a project that seems like a non sequitur from my past research. I'm working on, I'm researching U.S. Shipbuilding and shipbuilding capacity. My previous research has been about U.S. infrastructure power through overseas banking and how this network of overseas U.S. banks really established a foundation for moving the dollar that undergirded the growth of U.S. businesses overseas in the early 20th century. So on the surface, those projects really seem completely separate, but my larger interest is the way in which infrastructure networks are really the substrate for geopolitics and how the United States has both architected 20th century systems in its favor and kind of benefited from the dynamics of technology and finance that have really that enmeshed the world, particularly in the second half of the 20th century. And we're at such a weird and interesting time right now because so many of those cornerstone institutions and practices are really coming into question, whether it's how the dollar functions or how, kind of undersea cables move. So shipbuilding has its own particular contours and dynamics, many of which are very discontinuous from banking, but together these systems kind of inform my thinking about U.S. infrastructure power.
Yeah, and I thought it was a really interesting thing in the pandemic, how it shifted so much understanding to see how things like, supply chain disruptions can have these, not just global impacts where it's like an inconvenience, but it could end up having national security, implications as well. And it has massive impact on the financial systems, and all sorts of things can get disrupted by that one thing, supply chains. Or you look at these different little systems and points of connectivity, and the disruption to that has these big flow-on impacts. So how did you then, I guess, choose shipbuilding as the thing to kind of hone in as the next system to look at? What drew you to that?
It seemed like one of several areas where there's another thing. I think your point about the pandemic awakening to supply chains really brought things into full relief. There's another interesting thing is that there's a weird bipartisan interest in shipbuilding right now in the United States at a time when partisanship is really problematic and prevents a lot of kind of shared discussion on things. But shipbuilding, for some reason, is an area where traditional party politics don't really map on. So that there were, for a lot of reasons, it really it came to the fore as a topic to look at. So the combined acuteness of pandemic shortages, and then also in the backdrop, of course, the rise of China has really been pushing this issue to the front and center in people's minds.
Yeah.
An issue that was once kind of part of the invisible circuitry of how global trade operated.
And President Trump himself has had this real focus on shipbuilding. So he's, on the 9th of April, he issued an executive order that was titled Restoring America's Maritime Dominance. But you would say that this is a bipartisan issue. So I guess what is driving that focus right now? Did it predate Trump, or what is bringing both sides of the aisle together on this particular issue?
As you mentioned, the COVID-related pandemic sort of shortages and supply chain convulsions really made U.S. reliance on overseas shipping networks incredibly pronounced. And so there was a 2022 bipartisan Ocean Shipping Reform Act passed in the United States that really, you can see this interest that U.S. exporters are getting disadvantaged by U.S. reliance on overseas carriers. So that kind of concern and orientation, predates this administration and has been an area of bipartisan concern. Likewise, shared concern about China, the rise of the Chinese naval spending, and the number of Chinese warships also have really created a lot of focus in the United States on a bipartisan basis around shipping.
And right now, I mean, the differences between China's production levels and the U.S. production levels are stark. I think the U.S. is producing around 1% or less than 1%.
I read less than 1/10%.
Less than a
tiny.
Okay, so just a very
minuscule,
small fraction of the ships being built. Can these efforts to, I guess, increase U.S. shipbuilding, can that make a difference? Or is it just like a drop in the bucket and it's not going to make a difference? Or how hard would America have to work to achieve their goals? And is that feasible in terms of increasing the shipbuilding capacity?
I think it would be an unnecessary and counterproductive goal to try to surpass China's production shipbuilding period. But I think there are a few areas where more focused investment and kind of deliberate thinking could really change an ecosystem to reinvigorate shipbuilding. So it's not necessarily about flipping those numbers completely, but instead, in partnership with allies and really thinking strategically about what kind of capacity the United States wants in shipbuilding, could, I think, really make a difference in some of these ecosystems around shipbuilding, which themselves can have really long-term productive knock-on effects. So I think both Australia and the United States right now seem to be in this moment of really rethinking what the industrial base looks like. What is it? Do we need to reinvigorate manufacturing? What does that look like? What are ways to build that? And I think shipbuilding really cuts to the center of some of those issues. In some ways, it seems like such a retro industry. The United States hasn't had a real vibrant shipbuilding industry in decades. The real arc that ended U.S. shipbuilding was in the early 1980s. There used to be this policy called the Construction Differential Subsidy, which provided U.S. support for the difference, the greater expense of building a ship in the United States as compared to buying it overseas. And the Reagan administration and the kind of neoliberal moment of the early 1980s in favor of deregulation eliminated that subsidy. And that was really the collapse of the U.S. shipbuilding industry. It had been kind of in decline before that, but that was really the sort of death knell for the base of the industry. And right now, I think Australia is rethinking some of those same questions of manufacturing base and kind of defense industrial base. Some of those same questions are resonating here as in the United States.
I want to get into thinking about like what are the pain points and what are things that can be done about it in the U.S. and Australia. But maybe do you want to first just tell us a little bit about like kind of compare and contrast the shipbuilding ecosystem in the United States versus Australia? You've been here for a while now and you've been doing a lot of research on this. So what have you found? Are they similar? Are they different? What is the state of play in Australia versus the United States?
The United States shipbuilding industry is a very peculiar mashup of kind of historical forces and particularities that are very idiosyncratic. And part of that has to do with the 1920s legislation, the maritime. It's what's now known as the Jones Act, which requires that goods shipped to U.S. land be moved on ships that are U.S. flagged, U.S. crewed, and U.S. built. And so that the Jones Act has really shaped U.S. shipbuilding in very idiosyncratic ways, and the kind of political influence of the Jones Act industry is quite pronounced. I'm told, and that legislation has protected kind of a bare bones element of shipbuilding in the United States, and Australia doesn't have that legislative history and that kind of those industry contours. So there are some meaningful differences. I think some of the shared defense concerns are really common for Australia and the United States, and I think also the big picture labor, the workforce considerations seem quite similar in Australia and the United States. There are real active questions of what does it mean to have a new industrial workforce? Like, do people want shipbuilding jobs anymore? The turnover rate is so high. It's really hard to keep people in these jobs. They're very often really challenging jobs, and in many cases, being a barista, at least in the United States, pays about as well and is generally more flexible. So I think both nations are really thinking hard about what it means to, what jobs can be automated, what kind of investment is needed to re-stimulate those industries if they are indeed national priorities to kind of have as vibrant.
And what would you say is the biggest difference between the shipbuilding ecosystem in the United States versus Australia?
So far, most of the conversation in Australia seems really focused on AUKUS and naval capacity, submarines, the defense component. And the conversation about commercial shipbuilding is not quite as vibrant in what I'm finding. Whereas in the United States, there's a lot more industry interest and kind of commercial interest in all kinds of different types of ships. And so the gradations, at least, but I'm not an expert on that.
No worries. I do want to go back to the point that you made about it might be, I can't remember your exact wording, but it would be not the best exercise for the U.S. to try and kind of retake dominance and produce more ships than China. It'd be a waste of time and effort. So what do you think would be a good use of, national efforts for the United States and Australia if they want to strengthen their capacity on this? What things do you think they should focus on? What would give them a good, return on investment or achieve what they're hoping to in terms of changing the dynamics?
This is one of those questions where the devil's definitely in the details. And I think there are a lot of people who are a lot closer to the being in the weeds of these considerations that will answer that very, very, very well. From what I see, there are a few sectors that really that could score easy wins in the United States. There's definitely a need for tankers, for kind of general capacity, bulk ships, kind of general purpose, and vessels that aren't super specialized. And that does seem like an area where some investment could really help create an ecosystem where dual use vessels, there's a lot of thinking that if you have a commercial shipyard, you could just flip it to naval capacity. But the actuality is that ships are incredibly specialized. And, the kinds of things you need to outfit, really specialized naval vessels are quite different from what you need for commercial. So it doesn't really work like that. At the same time, there are some roll-on, they're called RoRos, roll-on, roll-off vessels, and bulk carriers that do have naval uses and can be part of the auxiliary fleet and also are quite commercially useful. So there's some areas like that where kind of could get early wins on the board from investing in that kind of capacity in the United States. And another area that is of shared interest is repair. There's a strong need for repair and maintenance. And Western Australia has ports that are capable of doing a lot more in terms of repair and maintenance in ways that could actually increase readiness of both Australia and U.S. fleets because of the downtime you need for booking repairs and for delays and things like that. So I think repairs and maintenance is a huge area of shared interest where there's a lot of common ground and potential for a lot of collaboration.
Yeah, and repairs and maintenance is never sexy or exciting.
No, it's so boring. It's so boring.
Everyone wants to think about new ships and the shiny new thing,
Exactly.
but it's something that's so critically important,
particularly for these incredibly high tech vessels.
Yeah. Behind China, I forget whether it's Korea is next and then Japan in terms of current ship production, or whether Japan's number 2 and then Korea. Is it something that the United States and Australia, if they want to counterbalance China, and if they're not focusing on as much production of their own new ships, would it be something where they're sourcing more ships from Korea or Japan? Would that be something they could focus on, or would that achieve what they're aiming for in terms of pulling some of the dominance away from China?
Absolutely. And I think this is going to have to be an all play for us to get anywhere. Also, the supply chains for ships. I'm told that there's a single aircraft carrier has over 1,000 parts from single source suppliers.
Oh, wow.
And some of those have 6 to 18 month backlogs. So just think about the production cycle you need for any of this construction. And those are multinational inputs right there. And so coordination and alliances are really critical, not just for the shipyards themselves, but also the huge number of suppliers and materials that go into these construction projects.
Wow. I mean, that's fascinating. 1,000 single source components.
It boggles my mind. I mean, I was reading a story. It was like this massive story about the international supply chain of zippers. And one zipper on one cushion requires like 5 different countries. And, it's just, and so particularly in this time of all, tariffs and all kinds of geopolitical upheaval, it's a delicate interplay that has to be coordinated.
Yeah. And even just having the disruption of tariffs, or even the threat of tariffs or uncertainty around tariffs, that uncertainty creates risk in and of itself that has business impacts.
Exactly. And shipbuilding is a slow business that requires big money, large upfront investments, and patience. And those dynamics are not suited to an environment where, every single hour there is new information about, where the tariffs are, where the financial trends are. So, if I were investing in shipbuilding right now, I would proceed with a great deal of caution. And that is very ill suited to the geopolitical needs.
Yeah. So is there anything that, countries that want to increase their shipbuilding, or, companies in the business of shipbuilding, is there anything that they can do to kind of, buffer against the winds of uncertainty that happen, or that they can do to have more resilience to better protect themselves if it's going to be a more if it's going to be choppy waters going ahead, is there anything that can be done now to help protect them and keep it smooth sailing, to continue with the metaphor?
I wish I had a single answer to that. I think that's really the magic balance that is precluding a lot of investment and forward motion right now. I wish I knew.
Yeah, and with the efforts that the Trump is aiming for under his executive order, the steps that he's taking to try and increase shipbuilding, do you think that could shift the current trajectory for shipbuilding for the United States? And if so, what sort of impacts would it have?
It absolutely could. What I hear are people saying that a lot of the proposals for increased funding are contingent on some of these fees and tariffs and new kind of taxes imposed on Chinese flag, Chinese built, Chinese crewed, on Chinese shipping lines, basically, and ships. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty about how strong is the U.S. commitment to that? Are those just bargaining chips? Might those change? How much money is really there? And so a lot of people are saying, yeah, we hear a lot of talk. Where is our money? We don't actually see the investment now. The SHIPS Act is proposed legislation in the United States that would really accelerate some of this funding. I was told it was recently referred to 12 different legislative committees.
Oh my gosh.
That is how you kill a bill, or maybe not kill it, but at least.
It's how you dismember.
Exactly. It's really throwing sand in the gears.
Wow.
And this is a moment when there is political momentum in the United States, but 12 committees will really unwind that momentum.
No amount of political momentum can overcome
12 committees. Exactly.
I guess I've got two more questions before I get your by the numbers stat. One is, what would you say maybe has surprised you most from your your time and your research in Australia? What sticks out to you as something that was maybe most surprising?
I was really, I took a trip to Western Australia, and that was a really eye-opening experience. I was struck by the different infrastructure considerations in Western Australia and the way in which that the economy seems really industrial in certain ways, and also high-tech in a lot of ways, and the mining corporations and extractive industries and all kinds of different, as the United States is considering how to reconfigure what manufacturing for this era looks like. It seems like parts of Australia have different models, and there is a lot of mining, there is a lot of industrial production in Western Australia, and it's done so in a way that's incorporating technology, very conscientious of environmental demands and sustainability considerations, and kind of the need for a social license. So I was really interested in the model of different parts of Australia for answering some of the United States questions about what reinvigorating manufacturing in the United States could look like. So I don't have answers to that, but that's something that I really found quite intriguing.
Well, that might lead into my last question, which was, I'm just wondering, I guess, what takeaways will you have from what you found in your time in Australia that you'll kind of like take with you and apply to either your next project or completing your research? What do you think is going to shift the direction that you're going in?
I don't have a perfectly burnished answer to that question right now, because it still feels like there's a lot churning, but being here has really opened up a lot of different ways of thinking about infrastructure and geopolitics. Australia has such a different kind of relationship to some of those questions, the proximity to China, China as a trading partner, and its centrality to Australia's economy in so many ways gives Australia a different position in the Indo-Pacific, and also its incredibly strong relationship with the United States. So I don't quite know what my distilled takeaways are, but the reconfiguration of the keywords that I've been looking at has been really eye-opening.
Yeah. And as you talked about that, it almost sounds a bit like a Picasso picture where you've got the different perspective and different spots, and you can kind of see it, and maybe it's a bit jumbled, but okay, this perspective here, and then this layer, and then that element. And then after you get a chance to step back a little bit, all of a sudden it could kind of come together and go here. But yeah, that's...
Yeah, I guess my nose is pretty close to the canvas right now, so I need to back away a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, very interesting. Well, I'd love to get your by the number stat. What do you have for us today?
My number is 46.
Okay.
46 is the average age of a ship in the United States Ready Reserve Fleet. 46 years old. Do you want to get in a boat that is 40? I don't want to get on a bike that's 46 years old. And this is the average age. So part of the reason 46 years old is the average age. And part of the reason that number has really stuck with me is I feel like there are so many, I've read so many statistics about how, the Congressional Budget Office says the U.S. Navy is over budget and all of these overruns and kind of production backlogs on for shipping. And so I have all these price tags in my head and over budget, and those kind of get meaningless. But when I think about the 46-year-old ship, it really it gets close to home.
Yeah.
And it helps me understand how deeply kind of knotted the problems of supply chains and production and construction really are. This is not about spending a couple $1 billion in one shipyard. This is a really, really deep global challenge.
Wow. I mean, that is just fascinating to think about the practical implications of all of that. And I think it'll be interesting to see if that number continues to climb, and then next year is it going to gradually go up to 47 and 48, or is something going to shift and that number will start to come back down? But you're right, I don't really feel like getting on a 46-year-old boat.
I feel very sorry for those crews.
Oh my goodness. And even doubles down on the importance of that maintenance and repair component.
Exactly.
Well, as we wrap up, I'd like to point out a couple of other podcasts that may be of interest. Our CEO, Dr. Michael Green, hosts the Asia Chessboard, and I'd also recommend checking out the USSC Live podcast series that runs recordings from our major live events. You can find these on our website at ussc.edu.au or wherever you get your podcasts. And also, if you like what you heard today, make sure to check out Mary's book, Dollars in Dominion, U.S. Bankers and the Making of a Superpower, which you can find on Amazon or other places as well. So finally, Mary, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks. It's been such an honor. I really appreciate it.